Hey, what up? We're here talking about why do we eat. The subject of this lesson is going to be pumps and channels. Okay, so we're going to talk about how you get stuff in and out of your cells in general. It's not like really specific to this type of food, but we're going to talk about eating food, getting it into your cells, and that involves pumps and channels, cell membrane transport, and so what we have here in blue is this membrane. It's like the membrane of the cell. This would be the inside of the cell over here. And then we have the outside of the cell would be out here, right? So it might be the bloodstream. We got some digestion occurring. You ate some food and you got it coming into your bloodstream because it's digested in your stomach. And then it comes through the bloodstream. It gets really close to your cells through the capillaries. And boom, you got some carbs and you got some fat that you're eating. Okay, now those are two different types of energy sources that we can use in order to convert that energy and charge up a battery called ATP. So those things we're going to enter into the cell. Now, there's a couple different ways you can enter into the cell. We got pumps and we got channels. Now, channels are something that is passive. It doesn't require energy, doesn't require any ATP, whereas a pump is active. It does require ATP and it does require that energy, which is why we call it active. With a pump, you can force things in that don't necessarily want to naturally flow in, or you can force things out that don't necessarily want to naturally flow out. Okay, the typical thing you think about when we talk about flowing in and flowing out is like, if there's 200 people in the hallway and 0 people in my classroom, they're naturally going to want to like spread into my classroom. It's the same way when you eat lots of food, okay? Or when you eat a bunch of like salty food or eat a bunch of sugary food or whatever, what happens is you create a concentration gradient where there's a lot of stuff here and less stuff over here. And naturally, the way the world works, as far as Newton understands and physics, is that things spread out, right? We got things spread out. We got 100 things here and 0 things here. It's going to spread out to 50-50, okay? Anybody farts in a room, anybody sprays perfume in a room, it's going to spread out throughout the room, okay? So that's the same thing that's going to occur inside of our cells whenever we eat a bunch of stuff and we have a bunch of stuff coming through in our bloodstream. It's the same way we get oxygen into our bloodstream, get CO2 out of our cells and back into the bloodstream. When we're breathing, that exchange is happening because there's an imbalance, okay? There's more here, there's less here, and it spreads out to equilibrium, okay? So we've got that food coming by, and there's more food in the bloodstream than there is inside of the cell here. And so it's naturally going to passively flow into our cells here. Okay, and the natural passive flow, there's lots of different names for it. We got diffusion and we have facilitated diffusion. Now, facilitated diffusion means that it's made más fácil. That means easier. And the facilitated diffusion means that it's coming through a protein channel. Okay, specifically, there's one for a type of carb. You break your carbs down, you get sugars. Okay, and there's a specific protein channel that we use called a glucose channel. And the glucose channel, you guessed it, lets glucose into the cell. And that glucose is going to go to the mitochondria. The mitochondria is going to do cell respiration in order to break that glucose down and charge up our energy molecule, ATP, adenosine triphosphate. Now that small little molecule, adenosine triphosphate, when you add on that third phosphate, that is charging it up, and now it can power whatever you need in the cell. Now, typically when we think about powering something in the cell, we're talking about an enzyme. And the enzyme is a working protein. Any protein that does any sort of work inside of your cell is an enzyme. And that's pretty much what usually uses your ATP, and that's why you need to charge so much of it up. That's why you've got the mitochondria doing cell respiration in order to charge up the ATP, and that's why you're eating food, okay? You got your carbs, you got your sugars. It's all going to be converted and broken down into glucose at some point, going through the glucose channel. That's facilitated diffusion because there's more out here and less in here. Once it gets in there, cell respiration, boom, right? Now ATP, now whatever we need to do in the cell is going to be powered and going to be charged by that, okay? Now, where do we get these proteins from? We get the proteins from ribosomes. Ribosomes are going to make all the proteins, okay? And if a ribosome is doing some work, you better believe it's an enzyme, and you better believe that it's powered by ATP. Now, that ribosome making our different types of proteins is going to get the instructions of RNA from the DNA, which we'll put over here in a nucleus. And we draw it as a twisted ladder. It's a bunch of spaghetti, but it's very well organized inside of the cell, even though when you're looking at it inside of the nucleus, it's going to look just like a pile of spaghetti, right? But that is DNA, and that is the instructions to make proteins. Now, if DNA is the instructions to make proteins, those instructions need to get to the ribosome, right? But the DNA has to stay safe inside the nucleus. So you've got to convert the DNA into RNA, specifically mRNA, and that is going to be able to leave the nucleus and get to the ribosome. That's going to be one specific small piece of an instruction so that you can make one specific protein. And we got all different types of proteins. We got channels, we got pumps, we got different types of channels, different types of pumps. And we've got so many other types of proteins that provide structure. We got proteins that do work, that's an enzyme. We got proteins that provide structure for the cytoskeleton to move around, to like make sure the cell doesn't fall apart or collapse or crumble. We got so many different types of proteins. And that's why we got so many different types or so much DNA. Because the DNA is the instructions to make proteins. And there are genes within the DNA, which is the instruction to make one particular protein. Now, when you dig into like really complex biology, you understand that it actually is a little more complicated than that, but the basics of that are still quite true, okay? And in that nucleus, this DNA, when you would like to make a protein, that DNA needs to be converted to RNA, and then the RNA can leave the nucleus, an actual molecule leaves the nucleus, goes to the ribosome reads it, and then can produce the proteins that we need to there. And that's it. That's how we make proteins. That's how we move stuff in and out of the cell. And we are eating this stuff so that we can make the ATP to power all that. Because every part of this process, whether you are making RNA or making a protein or bringing something into the cell or you are making ATP, all of that requires ATP in order for that to happen, basically, okay? Now, another thing that you can be eating as a great source of energy, of course, is fat. We know that fat can be burned for energy over a long period of time, and that's another thing that can come through your diet, and that will also go to your mitochondria in order to create ATP through cell respiration. So, of course, there's two different types of energy that are going to get that done, okay? Those are our basics there, and, I remember I want to talk about prokaryotes and eukaryotes, okay? So the difference between prokaryotes and eukaryotes is that prokaryotes are bacteria. Your prokaryote, your bacteria, does not keep its DNA safe inside of a nucleus. Whereas the eukaryotes, which includes you, an animal, and plants, and fungi, you are the eukaryote with a nucleus. Okay? And the nucleus, not the nucleus, the nucleus, the eukaryote, that is going to keep its DNA safe, which typically is why these things live longer. Now, yes, they're multicellular organisms, and the bacteria is a single-celled organism. But the better way to distinguish those two is that the eukaryote keeps its DNA safe in a nucleus, and that's the difference between those two. All right, that's our lesson for today. Thanks for watching.